Hello, everyone. It's me again, the devoted fan of the great Frank Zappa. And as you all know, everything is a matter of taste. Today, I'm going to share a few thoughts on 200 Motels, the movie. As far as I know, it's a rather controversial work. Controversial because Zappa's film earned him a reputation as an innovative and avant-garde filmmaker in the art film scene. But on the other hand, a significant number of Zappa fans see the film as proof that not everything the master produced was great and well thought. The soundtrack itself is equally revered, or at least respected. Personally, I will always hold the film dear to my heart as a surrealistic narrative and visual masterpiece. In my book of artistic films, I would place it right next to works by Nam June Paik, Godard's The Image Book, Fernando Biri's Org, any couch gag from The Simpsons Halloween special, and, for that matter, anything by Fellini. Hans Richter's Dada Theater would also work, as would Ken Russell's Listomania or Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise. I don't mean this as a comparison at all. I would throw the films I mentioned into a pot, and what came out would be something reminiscent of 200 Motels. Well, as I said, it's all a matter of taste. The only thing that makes me sad about 200 Motels is that it ultimately represents only a third of the entire concept of 200 motels, or that a third is missing. This third differs from time to time in reports on the subject. Anyway, I'm giving today some thought to the missing parts of the revered masterpiece, and please do not forget, I'm just a simple dog wondering where to dig for bones. First, we go back in time, or rather, make our way through the layers of time that make up Frank Zappa's project object. We then end up with the early Mothers of Invention. 200 Motels is not a product of the Flo and Eddie era, as you know. Of course, it includes this period of the so-called vaudeville band. Just think of the Jeff Simmons situation. He completely abandoned his part in the movie shortly before production began. You know the story, and even this event is reflected in the script. It's remarkable how quickly Zappa can react and process something. But now let's go back to 1967, when the craziness of touring was about to begin, and when the spray cream on the stage of the Garrick Theater was about to stink. The Mothers, Frank Zappa's art and entertainment concept, were truly unlike anything else at the time, certainly not to compare with any trend in the music scene. They were closer to art groups like the New York Fluxus movement or the European Dadaism scene, but without the constant claim to higher art. Frank Zappa knew no boundary between high art and nonsense. Yeah, interesting point. Remember that stuff about the ancient Egyptians that I told you about in the other videos? And that stuff about Mercury, aka Hermes, the messenger of the gods with wings on his helmet? As a coin on the one-size-fits-all cover, or animated in Bruce Bickford's Baby Snakes video, or as a baseball cap worn by Zappa on stage. The symbol of Hermetic philosophy, base of Varese composition, arcana. No boundary between high culture and low culture can be seen Frank Zappa's practical application of as above, so below. Zappa shows us how it's done. It's all one in his cosmos of entertainment and art. In art, this means, among other things, that it is impossible not to tell a story. Anything goes. Profound meaning can be drawn from anything, even banality. And for the artist, it becomes a symbol that stands for more than can be immediately recognized at first glance. This is how alchemy works, by the way. Recognizing more by leaving things out. The crux of the biscuit. An apostrophe. The heart of the matter. In ionization, electrons are removed from the shell of atoms or molecules. The atom or molecule that remains is then positively charged. In ancient times, the word magic did not exist. Instead, people said the arts. Isn't that magical? A television station that feeds the same thought to millions of people at the same second can be considered magical. Sadly, it is mostly black magic, somehow scary. We should be wary. Information is not knowledge. Wisdom is the domain of the wits which is extinct. Beauty is a French phonetic corruption of a short cloth neck ornament currently in resurgence. So, in 1967, when a stuffed giraffe ejaculated whipped cream on stage, and Marines tore a baby doll to shreds on the same stage. When no musical note was ugly enough to describe the political situation and vegetable was called by name. Frank Zappa listened to Christoph Penderecki in his spare time, paid close attention, and was overwhelmed. What he heard in '67 by Penderecki was not yet Zappa's favorite recording, The Devils of Loudun by the composer. That came later. But probably it were Threnody to the Victims of Hiroshima and Dadaism, the Auschwitz oratorio.
You all right? All right, let me ask you this, Frank. You want to be a serious musician, I assume.
I've always wanted to be a serious musician.
And where are you going from here, besides the bazaar that you're doing at this point? I mean, where are you going to go from here, and what do you want to achieve at this point now?
Well, I think one thing that I'd like to do is to not work.
Not work?
Yes.
In any field? Not write?
For a while. Oh, I'd like to write, but that's not work.
You mean composing isn't working?
No.
Well, isn't that what you're going to do for a livelihood eventually?
People don't compose for a livelihood, especially in the United States.
Where are most of the composers today?
Poland.
In Poland, huh? Oh, well, that's the way it goes, man. So what else would you like to talk about, Frank?
Let's talk about Poland. Why would people laugh if you say they're composers in Poland? Some of the best ones really are there. Why are they in Poland?
Like who?
Christoph Penderecki.
Yeah.
I guess that's enough right there. Do you know his music?
One. No, I don't.
Fantastic music. Zappa said that Penderecki went into musical landscapes even Varese didn't go. And in sections, Zappa's music on 200 Motels often sounds like a tribute to Penderecki's compositions, those landscapes of sound. The main difference between the genius of the composers Penderecki and Zappa is actually that Penderecki never released a rock album. It's a shame, really. Okay, well, maybe I should mention that Penderecki, which is indeed pronounced Penderecki. So watch out. Well, maybe I should mention that Penderecki recorded in October 1971, 2 weeks before 200 Motels, the movie, was released, a kind of crossover free jazz album with Don Cherry. Quite beautiful. It was Penderecki's debut as a conductor, and he composed for this event the piece Actions for Free Jazz Orchestra, which he had written down note by note, dot by dot on paper. In interviews following the performance of Actions, some of the players commented that because Penderecki had notated pitches and rhythms, they missed their usual freedom to improvise. The composer, however, noted that he attempted to maintain the flavor of jazz, and stated that if he had granted more freedom to the players, it would not have been his piece. Sounds familiar? Anyway, in October 1968, when Don Cherry played live with the Mothers of Invention in Copenhagen, Frank Zappa allowed more freedom for improvisation. Quite fantastic. The fact that Penderecki's Auschwitz oratorio found its way into 200 Motels can be clearly discovered in various places. For example, in the performance of Phyllis Brynjulfsson with the Top Score Singers. Singer and choir create an extraordinary atmosphere. The composers knew how to use this type of singing to lead the listener into an unexpected emotional experience. Furthermore, in 200 Motels, you can see a gate with the text, "Work liberates us all," above it. Arbeit macht frei was and still is a repulsive and cynical inscription above the gate to the Auschwitz concentration camp. Zappa's Concentration Moon and the chrome-plated megaphone of Destiny are therefore not only influenced by Kafka's In the Penal Colony, there's also Penderecki to find in it, and not only as sound. The next missing piece I would like to add to this jigsaw puzzle, called 200 Motels, is the memorable performance of the Mothers of Invention in Berlin on October 16, 1968. The German 68 students stood for political freedom, sexual freedom, enlightenment, equality, fair distribution of goods, freedom of expression, in short, everything that could make for a good society. And during the concert, the students created an opportunity to, let's say, talk about it, instead of having a musical show. Paradoxically, this meant that Frank Zappa, the hailed critic of the American establishment, was, in their opinion, the right person to lead a protest march to the imperialistic American embassy in Berlin to burn it down. Yes, literally, burn it down to the ground. Frank Zappa firmly rejected this, recommending evolution instead of revolution in response to this truly barbaric, unevolved idea of violence. He had the Mothers strike up marching music while some musicians marched up and down the stage in military step, like holding up a mirror to the students' actions. There is no need to explain why the Mothers had to leave the hall as quickly as possible. It was really getting dangerous. There is a very nice recording of Holiday in Berlin from November 6, 1970, at the Fillmore West, in which Flo and Eddie sing about this incident. A very nice soundboard recording. This recording also takes us back, or better, to the future 200 Motels, because the second song before it is called Touring Can Make You Crazy, which constantly repeats the name Rance Muhammitz, and changes Rance into something that rhymes with it, such as ants, sands, trans or trance, plants, and so on, before it goes into Would You Like a Snack? All to the melody of Holiday in Berlin. Something else. Have you ever wondered why the orchestra in 200 Motels is surrounded by watchtowers and barbed wire fences? I haven't. Of course, it would be evidence of a very limited horizon to relate the barbed wire and watchtowers in 200 Motels solely to the incident in Berlin. In the grand scheme of things, the props also represent Penderecki's work and classical composers who look far beyond the curvature of the horizon of a Mozart sphere.
Yeah, but there's other kinds of music around here too. You just don't get to hear it. The government caters too much to the tourist trade. They keep selling you Mozart till you want to die. They're sticking Mozart's face on everything. They've got them on little candies. They probably got Mozart toilet paper here, don't they? Yeah? Take that son of a bitch and just make a buck off of that poor guy with a white wig. His parents abused him, trotted him all over Europe when he was a kid, never gave him any time to have a bit of personal fun. These prodigies wind up in a little candy like that and give it to you on an airplane. That's the first thing you hear about when you get here. Hey, Mozart land. He slept here.
Barbed wire and watchtowers serve as a convenient mechanism for conveying certain philosophical ideas that might otherwise be more difficult to communicate. Just like poodles. 12 days after the Berlin concert in October 1968, they performed at London's Royal Festival Hall. The CD Ahead of Their Time features wonderful pieces that were later rearranged for 200 Motels. The title 200 Motels itself was not mentioned as such at the Royal Festival Hall. A film clip from this concert can be found in the film Uncle Meat, a beautiful document about all that stuff that got to form in 200 Motels. If you don't have the original VHS, you can, no, you should, insert this very film clip, which can also be found on YouTube, into the 200 Motels film. Right at the point where, in Murakami Wolf's magnificent animation, directed by the brilliant Calvin Schenkel, the airplane with the Zappa Power inscription appears in Dental Hygiene Dilemma. The plane appears shortly after an animated concert scene. There, the speech bubbles above the heads of some concert-goers are in German. In addition to Gesundheit and Düsseldorf, you can also read Auf Wiedersehen, but wonderfully misspelled as Auf Wiedersehen. One person even says, word for word, play Caravan with a drum solo. Isn't that cool? Isn't that a reference to the disastrous concert in Berlin? The animation for Dental Hygiene Dilemma also mainly features photos of the original Mothers from 1967 to 1969, with only a few from the vaudeville Mothers band around 1970. Perfect, I might add. I also recommend you to search for Burnt Weenie Sandwich, the unreleased short movie, and try to find Frank Zappa and the original Mothers of Invention, 1967 to 1969, the psychedelic version, which is an about 40 minutes long collage of the movies by Ed Seaman, a part of many hours of material he filmed on tour with the Mothers. Ed Seaman started around 1970 to make art porn movies under the name Eduardo Cimano, where pussies and dicks still look like pussies and dicks. Anyway, on Uncle Meat, the album, you'll also find Legend of the Golden Arches, an instrumental piece about the yellow letter M of a burger empire and cruising for burgers, the kind of snack that Rance Muhammitz offers Mark Volman in exchange for his soul, or at least for a signature in blood on the delivery contract, which is then ultimately overturned by Martin Lickert at the last moment. Add these compositions to your future thoughts about 200 Motels. For my part, I think about what a burger really means in the Zappa universe. I also think that Martin Lickert, Ringo Starr's driver, could play Jeff Simmons better in this particular scene than Jeff Simmons himself could have done. With Rance Muhammitz, we end up with the devil and somehow back with Penderecki, the Catholic gentleman, as Zappa called him, who recorded one of Zappa's favorite albums, The Devils of Loudun. The performance of the opera, which was filmed at the Hamburg State Opera, can also be found on YouTube. Just a quick note, not one of the nuns is played by Keith Moon. The theatrical performance is fantastic, great actors and singers. Do yourself a favor and check out this recording, even if it's just the trailer. The album is well worth recommending. I own a beautiful box set with a very nice accompanying booklet, which of course emphasizes that The Devils of Loudun is based on Aldous Huxley's novel of the same name. I also find the following noteworthy. The Devils of Loudun symbolizes the composer's interest in traumatic historical events. Rather than recounting these historical events, the opera highlights a more general dichotomy between central and local power, thus providing a political commentary that denounces the injustices of the totalitarian states of the mid-20th century. Accordingly, the thematic construction of the opera should be viewed as allegorical rather than purely historical. And this is exactly what applies to Frank Zappa's surrealistic documentary, 200 Motels. When Frank Zappa premiered his composition 200 Motels on May 15, 1970, with the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra conducted by Zubin Mehta, he also incorporated a few pieces from his soundtrack compositions for The World's Greatest Sinner into the 200 Motels suite. I can only assume this was an alchemical portion of ingredients to infuse a bit of sinfulness, or better, a touch of religious fanaticism, as also addressed in Penderecki's The Devils of Loudun, a device that, unnoticed and surreally, may have harked back to Zappa's 1965 conviction, his arrest for alleged conspiracy to distribute pornography on tape, perversely commissioned by the local moral guardians. But what do I know? I'm just a dog, and art is a magical language you have to learn to understand. There was even a reunion of the original Mothers for that evening, followed by a very brief tour before that band lineup was history forever. The sinful element of this Contempo 70 performance was later replaced in the film by Keith Moon's appearance as a nun. A groupie here, understandably, given that nuns are the brides of Christ, or rather Jesus's groupies. I don't know. I could be wrong. I don't want to step on anyone's sandals, on feet with a thong rind. The crux of this religious biscuit is a famous English drummer, and religious biscuits were normally offered with wine and can be used as the crux of the showdown in a movie called The World's Greatest Sinner. Another crux of a larger biscuit is another famous English drummer, a dwarf named Larry, who dresses like Frank Zappa and is actually named Richard Starkey, or Ringo Starr, how the world knows him. With the two famous drummers, I wonder if it's a coincidence that this is the first and last time Frank Zappa, who started his musical path as a drummer, is filmed as such. Another crux of a mighty biscuit, an apostrophe. Incidentally, the definition of an apostrophe is also the omission of a number or letter, and a number or letter is often used as a symbol for something greater. Such, let's just say, apostrophes are also Don Preston and Jimmy Carl Black's appearance in the film 200 Motels. Isn't that magical and wonderful? All what isn't visible in the film 200 Motels and is hidden between the images and lines of Zappa's movie can at least be glimpsed in Dave McMacken's breathtaking 200 Motels painting. Dave McMacken knew Calvin Schenkel and was recommended to Zappa by him. As a test, Zappa gave McMacken the task of creating a pulp magazine-style portrait of Zappa, a portrait in which the composer watches over a scene with wild, wide-open eyes. Although this design wasn't used, it demonstrated McMacken's talent and landed him the commission. The portrait wasn't withheld from us Zappa faithful, though. It later appeared on the cover of Overnight Sensation on the Little TV, and on a publication called Rare Meat, featuring tracks from Zappa's Cucamonga days. Back to the 200 Motels cover, and here I'd just like to touch on a few details. For example, W.C. Fields and Groucho Marx appear on the poster and cover. Their appearance seems to indicate the direction the humor of 200 Motels is taking. And on the opposite side of the painting, you can see the monolith and the star child, reflected here in the monolith, from Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey, a favorite film of Frank Zappa. Since the monolith itself appears in 200 Motels, with Chunga, the vacuum cleaner, dancing around it, its appearance is unmistakably more than just a reference to a favorite film. They even went to the trouble of having the monolith made, especially for the set. Kubrick had all the props destroyed after completing A Space Odyssey, so it might mean something quite important. But what the reference really means, I'll leave to you, dear viewers. Keyword: philosophy of creation and the meaning of life. You'll find out. Things get truly profound on the side panels of the entire painting. It's actually a kind of triptych. Unfortunately, the entire painting was only used for the billboards advertising 200 Motels. I'm at least not aware of any high-quality publication of this breathtaking and profound work. From now on, I'll keep my mouth shut and just let sections of the painting pass by in the background. I have to be careful not to over-explain everything. Just a hint. You will see some people naked from the waist up and in chains. Don't see them as the persons they are. See them as the ideologies they represent, and imagine a probably fanatic imaginary person at the other end of the chain, not seen in the painting. A person who didn't have his freak out, or better, is still not him or herself. I'll say ciao, bye-bye, au revoir, and auf Wiedersehen. You just saw my ad-free contribution to the missing piece of the filmic jigsaw puzzle called 200 Motels. Buy my book, if it gets printed one day. Its name is ZAPPA'S. This was not really an ad. I'm your friend. Legend is I'm actually man's best friend. Totally. Off. And peace and love. That's what Larry the Dwarf always says when he dresses up like Ringo Starr.
problems in the world.
Lord, have mercy on the people in England, for the terrible these people must meet. And may the Lord have mercy on the fate of this movie, and God bless the mind of the man in the street.
Was it okay for the audience? No?
Huh?
The audience was okay for you?
Yeah. Except for the fact they couldn't understand what I was talking about. What more could a person ask?
That's a problem almost at every place in Europe, isn't it?
Every place in the world.